Welcome back to Tales from Our Dark Past. Today's story is about one of Britain's most well-known cases of an alien encounter of the fourth kind. This case was studied intensively by the well-renowned UFO investigator Andrew Collins. And what he found astounded him, and he deemed it to be the most important case in Britain. The events in today's story have been widely studied for decades by UFO investigators and other professionals, and is seen as a credible account of a genuine case of alien abduction. The events took place in the English county of Essex, in the small town of Aveley in Thurrock, not far from London, and soon became known as the Aveley Alien Abduction. It was Sunday, the 27th of October, 1974. The Avis family consisted of John and Elaine Avis and their 3 children, Karen, age 11, Kevin, age 10, and Stuart, their youngest, who was just 7 at the time of the events. They'd had a wonderful Sunday out, visiting Elaine's parents, but it was starting to get late and John was anxious to get home in time to catch a TV show he'd been waiting to watch, and it was important to him that he didn't miss it. The familiar drive home from Harold Hill was one that John had done countless times before and should only take them around 20 minutes. They left at about 9:50 p.m, giving them plenty of time to get back for John's show. The children were exhausted from the busy day with their grandparents, and not long into the journey, Karen, the eldest, and Stuart, the youngest, had both fallen asleep in the back seat of the car, leaving 10-year-old Kevin alone to gaze out at the window into the night sky. The dark country roads seemed extra quiet tonight, and they couldn't see any other cars on the road. "What's that?" Kevin said a short time later, pointing up to the sky and drawing his parents' attention to a large blue light that had appeared near the car and was now lighting up the dark road ahead of them. John, Elaine, and Kevin then watched on as they continued their drive. The light remained in front of them, as if it was following their vehicle, stopping and waiting for them at times before moving again and darting around in the dark sky above them. It only left their view for a short moment as they drove through a wooded area. The family watched the light in awe, wishing they had a camera and questioning each other as to what on earth they were seeing. Scarily, as they turned the corner onto Park Farm Road, the UFO also turned with them, and now they were certain that it was following them. They grew more and more concerned about what this unknown object could be, and they were starting to get very worried about the situation that they were in. They experienced a short moment of relief as the light briefly disappeared behind some houses and trees, but this didn't last as it reappeared again almost instantly, still following them, even though they were driving at 30 miles per hour and had changed direction multiple times. Their fears only grew worse as they turned onto Aveley Road and noticed that the environment around them had started to change. It felt like the noise was being drained from the air. They couldn't hear the car or the radio. They couldn't hear anything at all. It was just total silence. Then they found themselves driving straight into a terrifying, thick green mist that quickly completely surrounded them. They estimated that the mist reached up to 9 feet tall in the air, and then the temperature dropped, and even though it had been a warm evening, it suddenly felt freezing cold inside their car. That's when the family reportedly started to feel very strange. Their bodies began to experience unique sensations and an all-over tingling feeling. They started to feel unsure of their surroundings and what was happening to them. Without warning, the car suddenly lost power and came to a complete halt. They sat there in the silence, surrounded by the green mist, for just a few moments before the feeling of a sudden jerk and the engine came rumbling back to life. The green mist was nowhere to be seen, and John started driving onwards towards home. But Elaine was extremely startled, and as soon as the power came back on, she felt compelled to turn around and look at her children. In a panic, she instinctively asked if everyone was still there. Which they were. Karen and Stuart hadn't even woke up and were still sleeping peacefully in the back seat, and Kevin was still awake and staring out of the window. They arrived home a few moments later and put the kids to bed. John sat down, happy to finally put his feet up and watch the show he'd been looking forward to. He picked up the remote control, turned on the TV and flicked through the channels. Looking puzzled, he scrolled through the channels again. Back then, there were only 3 channels to choose from, and John's show didn't seem to be on any of them. And that's when they realised it wasn't 10:30 like they'd thought, but it was actually gone 1 a.m, and they had no idea where those missing 3 hours had gone. It was like they'd experienced some kind of time slip. They all tried to put the weirdness of that night behind them and carry on like normal, but during the months that followed, the family continued to endure a long line of mysterious, unexplainable and paranormal occurrences. In the Avises' home, they started to routinely witness objects levitating and moving entirely by themselves. The house felt eerie and unsettling, and after midnight, the family would hear horrifying noises outside their home, like loud hovering and drone-like sounds. And they would often hear clicks or tapping that reminded them of Morse code. These creepy sounds were even heard by other family members and friends who'd visit the house. Outside of the home, John and Elaine felt like they were being followed, as men in dark clothing would sit in cars nearby and watch their house for hours, as well as following them wherever they'd go. John decided finally enough was enough and eventually called the police. But he claims that even they felt suspicious as the officer who attended arrived much quicker than he expected and also couldn't show John an adequate ID. John then claims that for the next month, he was repeatedly stopped by police whilst driving and brought into the station numerous times a week. He'd simply provide his identification and was allowed to go on his way. The family themselves also seemed to undergo a rapid transformation immediately after that night's creepy events. All of the family, except for Stuart, the youngest, became completely repulsed by meat, and the family became strict vegetarians, cutting out all meat and fish from their diets. And it wasn't just that they were disgusted by meat, but it also made them feel physically sick, like they just couldn't tolerate it anymore. John and Elaine also stopped smoking and drinking overnight, and the family showed a totally new interest in protecting the environment, even though it wasn't something that they had particularly thought of or cared about much before. The family had tried to keep what had happened that night to themselves, but tragically, John had been feeling the effects of their experiences, and by Christmas he had suffered a nervous breakdown, which isn't surprising given what he'd gone through. But this unfortunately led to him having to give up his job in carpentry and construction, but it did set him on a new path which he found even more fulfilling as he started to work with people with disabilities, and this brought him a lot of happiness. He also became more in touch with his creative side and developed a deep love of writing poetry. Elaine also experienced changes in herself. She felt a lot more confident than she used to, and she was even inspired to go back to college and continue her education. These changes weren't just limited to the parents. Kevin, who was the only one of his siblings who was awake at the time of the events, saw his abilities at school drastically improve. He went from being a little bit behind in class to excelling for his age. But unfortunately, not everything that Kevin went on to experience was quite so positive. He would often suffer from terrible nightmares, and one night the family was awoken by the horrifying sounds of Kevin's screams. They all went running into his room to see what was wrong. Kevin was adamant that he'd seen someone standing in his bedroom, and his description was chilling. Kevin claims to have seen a large figure standing in his room. He said that this eerie figure was dressed a bit like a clown, but all in white, like a ghost, and that it was just staring at him creepily. It wasn't just Kevin that had been experiencing horrendous nightmares. Elaine and John were also suffering through the night and struggled to sleep. They'd have horrifying nightmares and flashbacks of seeing strange creatures and undergoing terrifying medical experiments. Eventually, it got so bad the family sought help from the well-known UFO investigator and author Andrew Collins. Collins took a great interest in the family and their experiences. He wanted to test the validity of their story and study the events that the family claimed to have taken place. Andrew Collins pressed John and Elaine to discover their prior knowledge of UFO encounters to try to decipher whether or not they were just making all this up. And he found that they only really knew about as much as the average person did at the time, and they had very little prior knowledge of other alien abduction cases or investigations. Collins himself said that their knowledge was very limited, and he found the family's story to be extremely credible. Andrew Collins wanted the family to undergo hypnotherapy sessions to help them to recover the memories of what happened during those missing 3 hours on that fateful night. Kevin was too young to undergo such treatment, and Elaine adamantly refused. She really did not want to remember what happened on that awful night. But John was keen to get to the truth, and he agreed to do the sessions. So Collins enlisted the help of the hypnotherapist Leonard Wilder to perform the sessions, and what they uncovered was mind-blowing. When the time came for John to undergo his first session, he was so scared at the thought of reliving those memories, he almost called to back out. So they decided to take things slowly. The first session just involved introducing John to hypnotherapy and making him feel comfortable, and by the second session, John agreed to undergo hypnotic regression and was taken back in his mind to different times throughout his childhood, regressing to ages 13, 11, 5, and 3, with his voice even changing and becoming more childlike during the session. Then, when the team felt comfortable that John was ready, they asked him to recall what had happened during their drive home on the night of Sunday, the 27th of October, 1974. They started at the beginning, asking John about the bright light the family saw above their car. He described it as flying low in the sky and shining brightly. It started out blue, but then changed color. He then went on to describe the moment that they drove into the thick green mist and the eerie silence that fell on them. What John described next is truly terrifying. He describes being taken aboard an alien ship and being surrounded by weird beings who separated him from his family and told him not to worry about the children. John said that they communicated this telepathically with him and took him into a large room away from the others, where he was placed on a type of examination table. As he lay there, John describes being surrounded by 2 different types of alien creatures, one which were very tall, human-like beings wearing jumpsuits with big, pointed pink eyes. And these were the beings who could talk to John telepathically. Then there were others who John describes as being short, fur-covered, goblin-like creatures that communicated with strange chirping sounds. John then claims that a long honeycombed bar swept over him, scanning the length of his body like a piece of high-tech medical equipment, and that he underwent multiple other weird experiments on his body. He said that it appeared that the small, hairy creatures were assisting the tall alien beings with their human experiments. As the therapy sessions went on, John revealed more and more details about his experiences and the beings that he interacted with on that terrible night. And even though Elaine didn't want to undergo therapy, she was present throughout John's sessions, and her nightmares had been getting increasingly worse over time, with more memories coming back to her as time went on. Both John and Elaine produced drawings of the creatures they'd seen, with both creating similar sketches even though they were being interviewed separately. During one unsettling session, John was questioned more by Andrew Collins about the aliens that had taken him. John said that they weren't very nice, and that they had non-human mouths and features different to our own. During one session, John also mentions the word Phobos, which is the name of one of Mars's 2 moons, although he wasn't certain why the aliens had mentioned this to him. Dr. Wilder also asked John why the aliens had come here, and quite disturbingly, John replied by saying that they had come to observe and to lead, and that the aliens need us as hosts. John then repeated the words, "No visit, no visit. They aren't here visiting us. They are here always, and they have multiple bases all over our planet." When they asked John where these alien bases are located, John went completely silent and wouldn't say another word. At the end of the session, John said it felt like his words were being restricted. He felt he couldn't say any more. John's sessions underwent heavy scrutiny by an array of professionals, and his story is deemed to be very credible and genuine. And so is Elaine's, who had also been able to give detailed accounts of what had happened to her on that night. Even without the help of therapy, she found her memories eating away at her and coming back so prominently that she could also tell her version of events. Elaine also explained how she was separated from John and the children and was taken away into a large oval-shaped examination room. Elaine claimed that she was restrained and strapped to a table before undergoing exams similar to what John went through. She says that they seemed to be focusing on her left side, around the area of her kidney. She was so terrified that she didn't keep still. She was struggling and resisting and trying to get away. Then one of the tall alien beings told her that they couldn't do anything with her while she was behaving like that, and it placed its fingers on her forehead and eyes, and she lost consciousness. But her ordeal continued, as when she awoke she was still there. Both John and Elaine described losing consciousness multiple times throughout the ordeal, and they even said that the aliens must have changed their clothing, as at one point their clothes had changed, and they found themselves wearing the same type of jumpsuits that the alien beings were wearing. Elaine recalls being in such distress. She said that one of the aliens took pity on her. It tried to play her some music to help calm her down, and it produced a soothing melody to her telepathically, but it didn't help, as all Elaine could think about was her children. Then the creature told her something deeply horrifying. Elaine explains that the alien found it curious and unusual that she was worried for her children, and that it told her, "Your children are safe. You value your children. We do not reproduce. We do not have children. We reproduce through you. You are our children." Both John and Elaine also describe being taken into another room and being told to lay down and made to stare at a large screen which rapidly flashed through images far too quickly for either of them to see or recall. But both say they were shown the disturbing footage compiled of hundreds of detailed images and visions. They described it like having an entire encyclopedia flashing through their minds. They could also hear indescribable dialogue as they were watching. John told the aliens that it was moving too fast for him to see or hear, but he was again told not to worry and that his mind would remember. They said that they were also shown another planet through a high-tech looking hologram. The aliens told them that this planet was once theirs, but that it had been destroyed long ago. It showed them the planet in its final years, as the aliens explained to John and Elaine that this is where they came from. But due to overpollution, destruction, and the mistreatment of the planet, that it became completely unlivable. The planet was left in total ruin and had lost its 2 suns and 1 of its moons. The aliens explained to John and Elaine that this is the seed of life, our past and your future, our whole existence. John said that they are us, and went on to give more details about how the aliens travelled here. He said that they used gravitational forces and something called magnetic drive to navigate Earth's atmosphere undetected. He also claims that they told John that they could travel anywhere almost instantaneously. Then John and Elaine recall mysteriously waking up back in their car and continued their journey home, completely unaware of what they'd just been through. Both Stuart and Karen had remained asleep in the car throughout the entire experience, but Kevin was awake. And he also had memories of what had happened that night, but his parents decided it was best for him to be kept away from the investigation, as he was still just 10 years old at the time of the events. But they did share one thing that Kevin had confided in them. One day, Kevin seemed lost in thought, and he approached his father and told him that they gave me a lot of things to do when I grow up, but I've forgotten them all. And as Kevin would be an adult now, I can't help but wonder if he ever regained those memories and what he chose to go on and do with his life. But as all of the names used in this story have been changed to protect the family, we may never know. The lead investigator, Andrew Collins, claimed this case to be the most important case in Britain. It's seen as a credible account of a genuine case of alien abduction. But what do you think took place on that fateful night back in 1974? Let us know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps our small channel out. Thanks for watching Tales from Our Dark Past.